Hi folks, welcome to your Planning Outlook that's updated on the 9th of December. Now we're getting into a fairly murky, stagnant few days of weather where the hills are often shrouded in fog and cloud. There will be some rain around, not often that heavy, just a nuisance value and persistently damp in some places over the days ahead. Some snow still across the higher Scottish mountains where the temperature will stay generally at or just below freezing point. Slight lift of temperature as we go through the weekend, but on balance, chillier patterns with the mountains typically sub-zero are likely to prevail. Let's have a look at freezing level. First of all, keep an eye on the date and time in the bottom corner of this chart as we go forwards. This is for Thursday, first of all, and indicates that the freezing level across Scotland is around 800 to 1,000 metres or so. The lowest values typically across more central and eastern regions, which will tend to be more clagged in low cloud and fog. With a southeasterly airflow, those areas more around the west coast will see the highest freezing level, where temperatures are likely to be above zero, even up to higher tops. Across Northern England, well, you're typically just above freezing onto the very highest summits in the Lake District, and in Wales, the freezing level is that bit higher again. That story more or less plays itself out as we go through Thursday daytime, maybe a slight lift of freezing level even onwards into the evening and the night. But as we go through into Friday, it's a similar sort of situation where the lowest freezing level is focused more across the eastern side of the Highlands. Around the west coast, it's typically a few degrees above freezing to the high tops, and across England and Wales, typically again above freezing overall, with Wales still seeing the highest of the temperatures. Into the weekend, and we stay similar as we begin Saturday, although temperatures just likely to come up a little bit further across Scotland. So I think the general freezing level more like the 1,000 metre to 1,200 metre range, and maybe just lifting with time through the day. And again, we're above zero to the high tops across England and Wales, maybe only by a degree or so across the Snowdon range though. Now onwards into Sunday, and we get some fronts coming up from the southwest, and this bringing some much milder air in across Wales. The green colours here, you can see how those freezing level values begin to go up, but we still stay relatively down at 1,000 metres or just above across Scotland and even Northern England, but we're still above zero on the high tops there. Temporarily then, around Sunday evening and night, that milder air looks as though it does move northwards across Scotland, so a spell around Sunday night where temperatures go above zero, even over the highest tops in Scotland. So a temporary thaw there and a little bit of rain around maybe for a time. But the idea that by the time we get into Monday, temperatures will be coming down again, and you're back down to freezing point at 1,200 metres or so. And as we roll onwards into next week, it's likely that a similar sort of weather situation to what we're just getting at the moment is back in play, where the freezing level is around 1,000 metres and maybe just occasionally a little bit below. So as we said a few days ago, it's that story where we're not getting particularly deep freeze cold conditions across the country as a whole, but we're rarely being what you might call mild, certainly in comparison to some recent Decembers. Charts for the next few days then, this is the rather messy situation we're left with on Thursday. Various bits of fronts trying to push their way north and eastwards across Britain. Generally a murky day. Often when we get south or southeasterly winds at this time of year, it's all clagged in with murk, and that's the story really for Thursday. Some areas of persistent drizzly rain, a bit of snow flurries across the higher Scottish mountains in there, none of it really amounting to a great deal, but could just be rather persistent, particularly around the west coast. Wind fairly light, but could just be locally gusty. In some places those gusts getting down into some of the corries. Now onwards into Friday, and fronts still continue to push their way in from the Atlantic, but rather reluctant to make any progress through across the country as the weather pattern stays slow moving. A southeasterly wind that's running ahead of those fronts will be very strong across especially Scottish mountains, and a classic situation with a southeasterly in this sort of setup where some very powerful gusts will get down into the corries and locally to some lower slopes, gale force gusts in places, so just be aware of that. Strongest winds typically focused around the northern and eastern side of the Highlands. Again, it's a very murky sort of day. We've got areas of rain and drizzle and some sleet and snow on the higher Scottish mountains. The best of any brightness typically towards the far northwest, with some shelter to the lee of the Highlands around the northwest Highlands coast, likely to be the best for any cloud breaks, and the temperatures just that little bit higher here as well. Slowly moving weather systems continue into Saturday. Still a lot of murk and low cloud across many of the hills, dregs of drizzle and rain, and bits of snow flurries just on the higher Scottish tops. Again, a southeasterly drift across the Highlands, not quite as strong as Friday, so a very stagnant sort of day in many places, but watch out for some local gustiness being around. Just turning the flow a little bit more west by northwesterly across Wales and perhaps northern England, which may just drive some showers, which could just be on the heavier side across some of those coastal fringes around the Irish Sea. Temperatures then typically just above freezing point, apart from on the very highest Scottish tops. Things do get a bit of a shove as we go onwards into Sunday. Weather systems over the Atlantic just gearing up a little bit by this stage. So the wind flow from the south just strengthening likely as we go through the day. Fronts moving in and some rain turning up across Wales. That gradually extending northwards across northern England and Scotland, preceded again by some snow across the higher tops in Scotland. Timing of this is open to a bit of question, but just the whole weather story likely going downhill as the day progresses. As we saw on that freezing level chart, temperatures across the Scottish mountains for Sunday daytime, chances are you're still just around freezing point on those higher tops, but then just as that warm sector starts to push northwards, just that brief lift of temperature around Sunday night. It's hardly genuinely mild air that's getting in, and this chart as we go onwards into next week sort of tells that story. As we just trace things back over the Atlantic, notice how there's plenty of cold air that's coming out from between Canada and Greenland, that all feeding into the weather systems over the Atlantic. Any of the warm sectors and warm fronts that sometimes come in across Britain from the Atlantic are typically being shoved further across Spain and into France as we go onwards. The generally chilly air mass that exists over the North Atlantic is pretty much here to stay into next week. Low pressure still on the sea, and it's all a very similar sort of weather situation to what we're seeing at the moment. Just notice how we see the prevailing wind flow to the north of Britain as an easterly, all the way from Scandinavia into Greenland, and that's heading off towards Canada as well. Fairly high pressure exists well towards the north, maintaining that general easterly flow. So all of that is sort of stopping these low pressure systems getting back further northwards, which if they were to do that would open the door into milder air for Britain, but it's not wanting to do it. It's wanting to keep this sort of slow moving, low pressure scenario in charge with chilly air still trapped within it, not deeply cold air, but still enough to keep the higher mountains at least sub-zero most of the time. Various little ripples of weather systems coming around the southern flank of these lows may just spin themselves up at times, particularly across England and Wales, where some briefly milder air may get in, but only at the moment relatively mild compared to some other occasions, and those could produce some areas of rain, sleet and hill snow at times as we go onwards through the middle and second half of next week. The overall message, even later in the week, although this gets very tentative on the computer modelling by this distance, just keeps a very similar sort of weather pattern in charge. Further centres of low pressure wanting to come out within fairly chilly air over the North Atlantic, and still to the north of us that prevailing easterly flow. If the whole pattern just evolves around slightly further and opens the door across Britain more to that easterly flow, then we could find a more widespread drop of temperatures in the next couple of weeks. That, though, is open to question. Nevertheless, it's chilly times that prevail on the mountains in the next week or so. We'll keep you up to date with all those details, of course. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.